It's September 1976, and Yes are en route to Switzerland. Switzerland is home of Heidi, Toblerone chocolate, fondue parties, and the Helvetica font. Our band join a long list of jet-setting tax exiles, British musicians who have left their homeland to avoid an eye-watering 95% tax rate on their earnings. Yes are booked into the Mountain Studios to record their new album, but can't yet enter the studio because it's being used by fellow big spenders Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who are overrunning time recording their Works album. This delay results in Yes spending more time slowly developing the new songs and further adding to the already huge cost of their Swiss project. Perhaps if ELP had finished on time, then Mraz may well have ended up playing on the final Going for the One album. He was, after all, a well-established member of the band at this point and claims to have contributed to the writing and arrangements of all of the songs and developments around this time. Although he was aware of the knife sharpening, it wasn't until December, when the Melody Maker announced Wakeman's return, that Mraz was fully aware that his time was up. This famous newspaper edition, incidentally, was printed and released prior to Wakeman himself actually being formally asked to rejoin the band, and surprised him also. Cutthroat and pragmatic business decisions were now part of the Yes DNA by this point, and being used to such luxurious living, it was easy to see how inviting Wakeman back into the band made a lot of business sense. Wakeman was a huge commercial draw at this point, and his recent solo albums had totally eclipsed Yes's. Rick, however, had accrued huge debts in the making and touring of these albums, and also his own extravagant lifestyle.
Money high, money low, money come, money go, don't worry me.
Despite Switzerland being one of the world's most expensive countries, Yes threw money around like there was no tomorrow. They lived like kings, staying in luxury hotels and dining out every night. To further add to the already astronomical costs, they flew out a team of studio engineers, a film crew, their friends, wives and family. At one point, the Howe family alone accommodated 9 rooms of a luxury hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, and to further drain their finances, the studio was built into a tempting casino complex.
Don't bother me, 'cause it really matter to you. Don't bother me, money doesn't grow on trees. Just don't worry.
Whilst in Geneva, the band and crew used to hire cars from a local hire company and race them around the lake with the sole intention of wrecking the cars as quickly as possible. And not to be outdone by the likes of the Stones and Led Zeppelin, Yes had a huge Roger Dean logo stuck to the side of their private jet. This once resulted in near disaster when mid-flight the huge plastic logo peeled off and became stuck in the jet engine, resulting in an emergency landing. Perhaps the most extravagant of all, though, was Steve Howe buying a first-class Concorde plane ticket seat just for his guitar to sit on. Also, whilst in Switzerland, Wakeman bought a cottage only to find that it was inaccessible for snow through most of the period there, so ended up buying a second property instead. With no end of racehorses and Rolls Royces, football teams and country mansion houses, both Wakeman and the band's spending was as grandiose and excessive as their chord changes. But why not let the good times roll? Their 1976 shows alone are thought to have earned the band tens of millions in today's money, and it's not like there was a huge shift in musical fashion on the horizon or anything. The cost of their 6 months in Switzerland must have been astronomical, and Anderson was later to claim that no actual money was saved as a result of going out there to avoid the high taxation. So, was the final album worth it? Let's find out as we look inside the tracks that make up Going for the One.
One, two, three, four.
This new chapter of Yes kicks off with a bold and confident rock number. Written by Anderson during the Relayer period, it's thought to be Alan White that was responsible for a lot of its rocking and rolling arrangements. The lyrics, which Anderson forces out with every breath in his body, are at first glance at least his usual patchwork quilt of loosely connected hippie ideas, with obscure references to racehorses, Olympic rings and whitewater rapids. He sings about competing sportsmen, all striving for greatness. This is, after all, the same John Anderson that once had trials for footballing titans Accrington Stanley.
After seeing all your sense of fear diminish, as you treat dangerous pure collection, as you throw away misconceptions, going for the what?
The truth of this sport, however, is that Anderson is really playing rings around us, and the one that he seeks is a more spiritual oneness, as his sporting metaphors are really centered around the ancient Chinese concept of Wu Wei. This is the belief that our actions are at their strongest when they are without effort, and that the less we strive for, the more we can actually achieve. Why force the rudder through tons of crashing water when we can simply get the feel of the water's flow? Why really chase so hard? I'm not quite sure, however, if this Taoist less is more philosophy was employed by the band and the studio engineers whilst recording, as this dense track is often swamped by just too many instruments, and it gives the impression of a band simply showing off how many notes they can cram into one track purely for the sake of it. Midway through this opening song, our Lancashire lad demonstrates some self-mocking northern honesty as he questions the apparent nonsense of his own spacey lyric, which he must frantically get to the point of as the song gallops towards the final furlong.
Now the buzzes outside don't have much weight to the story in my head, so I'm thinking I should go around the punchlines. But they're so hard to find in my cosmic mind, so I think I'll take a look out of the window. When I think about you, I don't feel love.
At one point, the band added toy melodicas to it, and despite the great enjoyment that they had playing them, they were either removed from or buried very deep in the mix, and we'll probably never know, as incredibly, the master tapes for this album are believed to be lost. The end of the song possibly seems to cycle round just one lap too many, and it's like all concerned are just jostling to win a race, with Steve Howe's unrelenting slide guitar in pole position. However, it's Wakeman's final keyboard run that pips him to the post as the song majestically falls over the finishing line. This gem of a song was originally carved out by Alan White during the Relayer sessions, but in a much heavier style. Here it has a more delicate arrangement to it, and it tells the story of a sculptor called Rowan and the two loves of his life, his artwork and his lover. This woman, who could be the artist's model, annoys Rowan somewhat. "Be still," he cries as she dances around him, not letting him build her in clay. The song's mood becomes more melancholic as winter calls and the woman tragically falls ill and dies.
All those many years ago, I'm sure we know.
Rowan then begins to create a memorial to his lost love, immortalising her body in stone, and it's here that Wakeman's tender piano seemed to play the part of the sculptor's own fingers. As the artist works, the music develops a sense of form, discovery and urgency, and then suddenly climaxes into a triumphant house solo, as either real or imagined, the stone comes to life as the woman is magically returned to Rowan. The story is a reverse reimagining of the Greek legend of Pygmalion, in which a similar sculptor falls in love with one of his own creations, who is then brought to life by the goddess Aphrodite. Full of wonderful autumnal imagery that reflect loss and yearning, and the way we all reflect on our past romances, this much overlooked track is an absolute work of art. In a track originally intended for his Fish Out of Water album, writer Chris Squire suggests that he is somewhat tired and weary of the excessive drug-induced rock and roll lifestyle, and that he should find a different, parallel one instead.
It's the beginning of a new love inside. You've got the way to make it all happen. Said it's spinning, turning round about, create a new dimension. When we are winning, we can stop and shout, making love towards perfection.
The fire that he's been playing with isn't getting him high anymore, and perhaps a more spiritual path will open up new horizons for him, like the Hindu ever-opening flower. This song was written at a crossroads in Squire's life, when he was probably reflecting on the lavish millionaire lifestyle and family that he has recently acquired. Perhaps he felt a need to balance out his excessive partying with more restraint, focus, and stability.
Parallel sides, and we will find that we need to be where we belong. Parallel heights display our rights and wrongs, and always keep it strong.
Now, when one considers the circles that the band mixed in, the evidence suggests that Yes's own drug use was probably quite well balanced around this time. Pot and alcohol especially were consumed in abundance, but the interviews around the time suggest that harder drugs were less frequent. It is thought, however, that Squire's cocaine use drove a wedge between him and Anderson prior to the band breaking up in the late 70s. In interviews, Chris has frequently referenced a bad acid trip that he once had in the mid-1960s. It left him hospitalised for days and housebound for weeks. However, it was during this period of recovery that he learned to play the bass, another parallel path that we are all thankful that he took. The organ sound that dominates this track is the same that is used on the Awaken track, and it was played at St. Martin's Church in the Swiss town of Vevey, a few miles away from the band's recording studio. Rather than sending recording equipment into the church, Rick's organ playing was transmitted back to the studio via a telephone line.
From Switzerland, where the air is incredibly pure, comes an old Swiss recipe for a natural new breakfast cereal called Alpen. Alpen is a mixture of roasted hazelnut.
Oh, Swiss Miss Instant Cocoa. What's the best way to start your day?
Give a little yodel.
Swiss Miss has lots of rich chocolatey.
Hi, Mary. She loves blue jeans and Italian Swiss colony wine. Like
Lorsqu'on pense fondu, on pense Swiss knife.
This is the only track on the album not to have been written 2 or 3 years earlier. Anderson's Wondrous Stories was inspired by a morning walk around the beautiful Lake Geneva in Switzerland, and he claims that by the time he'd walked around the lake back to the studio, the song was fully written in his head. One interpretation of the lyric that it's about a traveller bound to meet his forgiver, possibly Jesus, who in no time at all takes our traveller to the gates of heaven. On checking the time, however, he's not yet sure if his time's up and decides to leave, but he agrees that one day he would indeed return to heaven to hear more of the preacher's wisdom. Anderson's cosmic mind at this time was like a sponge, and it would soak up whatever pieces of Eastern philosophy would happen to drift through his transom. And this song is one of the better examples of how he could subtly weave relatively profound and religious concepts into his music. Anderson often talks in interviews about how he can join connections with everyday beauty and divine spirituality, all without the aid of a dictionary, it seems, as the title of this song is actually misspelt. The playing is pure perfection here, and Howe's Portuguese guitar strumming recalls the Yes album track Your Move, and it provides a lovely sway. Squire's bass guitar glides in and out effortlessly. I can't say it.
Effortlessly.
I know what I'll say. Squire's bass guitar glides in and out with ease, weaving the track together, whilst Wakeman's Polymoog sprinkles a lush fairy dust sheen over everything. It's Anderson's voice, however, that really defines this track, and it contains a spine-tingling magic that never fails to move me, no matter how many times I hear it.
Return to hear your wondrous stories. La la la, la la la, la la
With its reaching out towards the sun and our own being, in many ways, Awaken feels like a long-lost fifth side to Topographic Oceans.
to the sun, let my heart dreaming past the marvelous me, the canopy.
It started life as an Arabian-flavoured howl riff, once set to be the track's opener, and was developed on the Relay Atoll with Mraz as a track called High Vibration and then Eastern Number. Mraz has frequently referenced his big involvements with this track's design, a claim that is supported by Howe himself. However, to my ears, it's Wakeman who defines this track the most. Now, I'm not saying Mraz would have been any better or any worse playing on it. It's Wakeman that somehow just seems to embody this for me. The opening flurry of his piano during the opening exposition hints at the flavours to come. The first being Howe's descending guitar lines, which he develops into an intricate hopping and skipping around the fretboard in a similar manner to his Close to the Edge intro. Anderson's Awaken Gentle Mass Touch mantra similarly alludes to Close to the Edge's Total Mass Retain. Mass probably means here like our weight and our soul, which he is calling us to awaken and open up and accept new things. His lyrics were inspired by a book called The Singer by Calvin Miller. This was a Christian allegory, with Jesus portrayed as a storytelling troubadour that travelled around a mythical world singing his songs of love. Squire's ominous bass prowls around with a grounding sense of intrigue and suspicion, whilst the whole band have great fun playing the multi-layered percussion parts. Finally, Wakeman's organ ushers in the climbing Workings of Man section, which seems to reorientate the track along the path of enlightenment, and the whole song seems to gather pace as we finally arrive at Heaven's Gate. The song then enters an atmospheric midsection, as if we were entering a state of meditation. And like with meditation, I often find my own mind wandering slightly and losing interest during this quiet lull. At the heart of the whole Awakened track is the notion of climbing, and this is especially felt towards the latter part of the song, which does seem to reach onwards and upwards towards the gods that we are all now a part of. I somehow can't do this justice with words. It's simply the combination of John's voice, the band's playing, and now a choir lifting it onto 11 is simply sublime. While some fans feel that the track doesn't quite match the heights of previous epics, both Howe and Anderson especially have often cited Awaken as the Yes song that they are the most proud of. Personally, I've no complaints with this assessment, and there's an argument to be made that the song really does encapsulate everything about this band in one track, and perhaps finally puts them on a musical level with the classical artists that they were originally inspired by. Whilst the album was being recorded, artist Roger Dean was invited out to Switzerland to hear the new music and create a cover based on it. His proposed painting, The Flight of Icarus, was rejected by Anderson, who wanted something stronger and bolder and different to previous Yes covers. Dean claims that Anderson wanted some of his own artwork incorporated into it, and based on such restrictions, Dean declined the offer and Anderson turned to Hipgnosis instead. The stark futuristic buildings are that of the Plaza Towers found in the Century City district of Los Angeles. They were originally photographed while Hipgnosis's Aubrey Powell was on tour with Wings earlier that year. Intersecting geometric lines were popular with Hipgnosis around this time. Here, at Anderson's behest, they represent the ancient Hindu concept of Kundalini, the points on the body from which all our energy flows to and from. Here, our organic man is also supposed to echo the idea of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man as he gazes out at his own technological future and new horizons. Hipgnosis were no strangers to nudity on their covers around this time, and the man here is probably a leftover from Dean's original Flight of Icarus idea. Atlantic Records and the rest of the band were unsure about the use of the man on the cover, with Howe especially being quite sceptical over it, and he stated at the time that Dean would indeed return at some point to do future Yes covers. In making this documentary, I really tried to track down who this guy on the cover actually was, and I spoke to numerous people who worked with Hipgnosis around this time, including the great Aubrey Powell, but no one could really recall who he was, and he certainly isn't John Anderson, as some fans believed at the time. Most people just seem to think he was simply one of the many hired models that were frequently used in the Hipgnosis photo studios. Our mystery man may have been going through the one day, but he was probably just the man at CNA the next. In July 1977, the album was finally released. Reviews at the time were largely very positive, with people welcoming the breath of fresh air and the return to simpler and more accessible Yes songs. The album reached number 1 in the UK charts and number 8 in the US, and whilst outselling both Topographic and Relaya, it was surprisingly outsold itself by Tomato the following year. The band took the album out on tour that summer, starting in Ohio and then moving across the US over the late summer. They arrived in London in October and then proceeded to move across a host of European countries until the end of the year. The live show saw the whole of the new album being played, along with fan favourites from the Yes album, Fragile and Close to the Edge. Topographics Ritual was played a few times, but nothing from the recent Relaya. The band would occasionally drop in short acoustic jams and an elongated ethereal opening to Awaken. A highlight of the show was John Anderson's Beautiful Land, This was a short a cappella number that was taken from a musical called The Roar of the Grease Paint, during which the stage lighting changed colour as John chanted the different colours of the rainbow.
Red is the color of a pretty little box. Orange is any orange on a tree. Yellow's the color of a bag of lemon drops. Green is the seaweed that is in the sea. And blue, the color of the sky in summertime. Indigo is the Siamese cat's eyes. Violet's the color of a pretty little flower. These are the colors of the rainbow sky.
To do justice to Awaken on stage, Squire was armed with his now trademark Wal triple neck bass. This bass was actually made for Roger Newell, who was in Wakeman's English rock ensemble, and it was Wakeman himself, the king of subtlety and understatement, who originally conceived its design whilst drunk. Newell claims that Rick rejected the double bass idea that Genesis's Mike Rutherford would use at the time and wanted to go one louder, as it were. In later years, Squire had a lighter copy of this guitar made, and the original is now rotated across various Hard Rock Cafe venues. The album was produced by the band themselves, and herein lies its main criticism, as the production seems to be cluttered somewhat, as if there are just too many cooks spoiling the fondue. There's also a layer of reverb that drenches a lot of the detail in it. Whilst I wouldn't say it's my favourite Yes album, there's nothing on it that I dislike or I find myself skipping over. Wakeman's return and the beautiful Swiss backdrop seems to embolden the band, and you can really sense their happiness here. There's a feeling of fun and contentment on this record that had been lacking for many of the albums preceding it. Also, it's as if the band's recent solo albums had recharged their batteries. Some may argue that this album isn't as bold and adventurous as previous ones, but then having the confidence to include more accessible and simpler songs is in itself a courageous move. Whereas Topographic sometimes seems muddled and overreaching, and Relaya schizophrenic and angry, Going Through the One shines in a bright technicolor rainbow, and it may well be the best all-round representation of what this band are really all about.